Now, here's an interesting thing I like here. You've got this button here where you can tweet your score. So tell me, Arnold, how much do you use social media in the games that you develop?
Yeah, that's a good question because I think for card crawl, the small tweet button that we have there that is not doesn't look too important was actually very important because if you look into the Twitter stream and you search for card crawl, you can see that not everyone, but almost everyone in the beginning was tweeting their scores and thus having us a very nice impact in terms of social media engagement on Twitter, especially because a lot of people are
Yeah.
really proud at the end of the game when they finally beat the deck, and then they almost all the time have this kind of little proud moment where they hit the button and then here is my deck, because we integrated a nice feature where we get an image from the server that I have set up, and in the image itself we have the 5 cards that are used to get this high score, so you can even compare a little bit, okay, with this deck this kind of score is possible. And you can also brag about how big your score was with this kind of deck, right? And yeah, I think people use that a lot, and that was really easy also to implement because, especially for Unity, you have so many pre plugins that you can just download from the asset store and plug them into your code and just have one line of code that actually says, okay, tweet basically, and does everything for you, even on the iOS side of things.
Yeah, so here's a guy here, Kev, telling us how he survived today's daily dungeon and got himself 104 gold, and he tweeted, and there's a great screenshot that's included there. Now here's something I'm actually glad this came up because it segues perfect, because this is one of the questions I get every single time I talk to students is they want to know about the money, and so we see right here we're talking about, so card crawl is in a card battle games feature on iOS, daily revenue up from 40 to 150. So tell me a little bit about I mean, how much money are you making off this app?
Yeah, right. So it's really interesting because the App Store right now is not the App Store that it was the time around 2012 where we started, where actually a paid game was not like a rarity because today everything is free to play or at least free with ads, right?
Right.
And for me personally, I'm quite old, I would say, and I come from a time where you had to pay one time for a game and then play
Yeah.
it. I'm not against free to play as a model if it's done well. I mean, I play a lot of Hearthstone, or I played a lot of League of Legends, for example. Those are also free to play games which do it very well and they don't bother you all the time. But on mobile, especially, there are quite some games that do that. And for me personally, I decided to make this game don't focus on monetization because that is something a pro has to do. I'm a designer and I want to make a game and I want to make the best game I can. And if I have to focus on both on monetization and on the game, I don't make a good game, or at least it isn't that good that it could be. So I decided I go with premium. I make a $2 game. I design everything I can into the game and make it as good as possible and hope for a featuring, right? Because on the App Store, for paid game, you always have to have some kind of featuring. It doesn't have to be a really huge one, but at least Apple has to recognize your game somehow and have to promote it because, as everybody knows, there are like, I don't know, 500 to 600 apps each day that I get released, and obviously not 600 of them are super good, but at least there are there are some that are good, and you always have a real big competition. So, and in the case of Cardboard, we got really lucky. We got a featuring. You have to take that in account to our numbers. Especially in the US store, we were, I think, number 3 in the best new games, which is a huge exposure. And in total, right now, up to this point, we made about $55,000 from the app. It was launched in
Nice.
March. But obviously, the biggest part of the revenue was in the first week when Cardcrow was featured, right? So about
Yeah.
$30,000 came in the first week. So you can see that if you have a premium game and you launch, you have to have the Big Bang in the beginning, and everybody is trying to force that, because if it's not a free game, it obviously after the first week drops out of the charts and gets hidden in the pile of apps and games each day, and then it gets harder and harder. But
Right.
luckily, we have a really dedicated fan base that did a lot of marketing for us, which is always the best marketing, obviously. If you have a friend who's telling you about a game, you're more likely to try that game as if you see it somewhere in the internet, right? And that worked out very well. Yeah.
Was there anything specific you did that got you featured on the App Store?
Well, so I have to admit that we had an Apple contact beforehand, because obviously we are releasing on iOS quite some time. So I have 9 games released on iOS since 2012, and we had a back then we had a not even a game, we had a kids book project, and with that we got an Apple contact because they were interested in kids content at that time for the iPad. It was a time where the iPad was quite new, and from there on, we could establish a really good relation to them, and we obviously pitched the games to them, and they decide in the end if the game is noteworthy for them or not. So it's not about having the contact, but it's about having in the first place a very good game that stands out in its
Right.
niche, I would say, and from there on, you can get a featuring, I would say, yeah.
Now we know that you used Unity to build this game. What was there any thinking or major thought behind that? Like, did you compare Unity to Unreal to any other potential engines to use, or is Unity just kind of your favorite engine because that's what you've used and that's what you're familiar with?
Yeah, as I said, my step to Unity was after I finished the stencil tool, basically, where I took, yeah, like the plunge into real coding, and from there on I sticked with Unity because I know the engine very well. I also got the question before if I have like looked at other engines, but for me personally, it's all about doing the least amount of work, actually. And for me, I know Unity okay now, and I have two things that for Unity are especially important. The first thing is most of the problems that beginners like me in programming have are already answered because Unity is around quite some time, and you have a
Yeah.
real huge documentation. You have forums and Reddit full of answers to really stupid questions that I have each day, and I can just type in my stupid question and it's answered already. So it's a really
Nice.
nice way of learning and also fixing your bugs and problems. And then the second most biggest thing is that the asset store I talked about before has also so much content that I can either buy for really cheap, like $10 to $20, where a lot of smart people have already solved almost all the issues that I run into. And if I don't do it myself, I can take one of those plugins and just use them and don't have to worry about making stuff wrong or breaking stuff. And it also, sorry, and it also speeds up prototyping development. It just saves time. You don't have to worry so much about the
Right.
details, right?
So, I love you bringing up the forums and the documentation. That's one of the big things that we teach our students in these classes is, how valuable that is to be part of a community where you can post questions and get help, and then alternatively, as you learn and grow, you can help others as they post questions and go there. And being part of that forum and that whole community sense is a real key part of, I think, any programming, but definitely a part of game programming. Um, okay, so my next question is I'm interested to know, was there any specific style of coding or programming that you had to learn, or some big obstacle that you had to overcome in part of making Card Crawl?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, as I've said before, I wouldn't call myself a programmer, and if I would show my code to someone who is a programmer, I don't think they would like call it programming. So from what I've learned in card crawl is that the I'm not 100% sure if that's the right term, but the component based model that Unity has, right? You don't have so much of inheritance, but each game object has its own components that you can switch on and off. This is something that is really powerful, and you can do really quick prototyping with this also, right? You can write smaller scripts. You can attach them to game objects, and then you can have those scripts interact with each other really fast. Because obviously in card crawl, the most uh, difficult part was the interaction between cards, and I had quite some time where cards were really hard to implement, like new special cards were really hard to implement because they were touching so many parts of the logic in the game. And in the middle of the development, I had to take a step back and yeah, clean up my code in that way that the cards are very easy to implement now. I cannot go into details because like that's too much, right? But
Yeah.
I just today actually implemented two new cards because we have an upcoming update at the end of the year where we will introduce 10 new cards. And I was able to introduce two new cards with completely different abilities than all the rest in like 2 hours, basically, which is really cool. And it also keeps down the amount of testing that you have to do. Obviously, the
Right.
game also had some bugs when they were launching because users actually found ways to combine cards that I hadn't anticipated, and then there were like really crazy bugs happening of cards not having their right values or even types anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was something that I liked developing card crawl, where I could get a glimpse of really yeah, interactive systems that produce outcomes that are not quite overseeable.
That is awesome. So I just want to repeat that. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I heard was you developed all of the code to make the cards work, and the game was working, and the cards were working. But what you discovered was that to make any new or additional cards was incredibly difficult. So you actually had to go back and redo a lot of that code, almost starting over to redo code you'd done before to do it in a different, maybe a more cleaner way, so that now when you make new cards, it's much easier. Is that a
Yeah,
fair restatement?
yeah, that's a fair restatement. I just had to yeah, modularize, or how would you say, like make components more independent of each other and not have
Right.
everything like clumped together in a big mess, basically.
Arnold, this has been a lot of fun. I really enjoy your game. I so want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to do this
Yeah,
interview.
thanks.
I know that I've got a lot of students that like your game, and hopefully after this interview, we'll have a lot more students that'll now know about and like this game. And maybe let's get together again after you do this update with the 10 new cards, and maybe do a follow up down the
Yeah.
road. And certainly when now, just between you and me, not to the tens of thousands of students who are listening. Are you working on a new game right now?
Yeah. So actually, we silently announced that we are also working on a new game. I just made a blog post on our website where I said that we do want to make a unofficial card crawl sequel, which will be played
Nice.
also with cards and also will have a similar style of play, right? So if you like card crawl, I guess, or I hope you will like the new game. But the new game has a very cool theme that I have not yet announced, and we have to get the visual art style for that going so we can make a proper announcement. But yes, if you like card crawl, you will like the new game, I guess.
Oh, awesome, Arnold. You have a wonderful weekend, and we will look forward to the 10 card update to Card Crawl, and definitely be looking forward to some more updates, news, and ultimately the release of Card Crawl the sequel.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It was really a pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. Thank you, Arnold.